So yeah, that's me, Tait Purcell. I do a lot of problem solving in my roles, ask questions. I love shenanigans. I am an amateur radio operator, KI5EQE, and I'm also a CrossFitter. I was looking for a picture to throw up there. I'm like, y'all can look at me, y'all can look at my bio and see my headshot, but I need another photo. And in my phone, I've got photos of food, of my cat, my dogs, and my kids. I don't have many photos of me, but I had taken this photo a few weeks ago while we were working on a movement that's pretty complex. It's called the snatch. Yeah, that sounds funny, but we're taking a weight off the ground dynamically in one movement, we're throwing it overhead. And it took me 4 years to get to that. And I was pretty proud of that. So I said, hey, I'll throw that up there. It's kind of embarrassing because it's very lightweight. It's like not much up there, Diary of a Wimpy Kid kind of weight. But hey, I was proud of it, so that's what you get to see. And it's a great segue into what we're going to talk about. Thank you, Josh. One great thing I love about CrossFit is that it is constantly varied. That's their methodology. They do that because with fitness, we're trying to stay functional over, like when I'm 40 years older, I still want to be able to get up and down out of a chair, get out of my bed, things like that. So that's their thought. But for me, it fits my head really well because I get bored super easy. So if I'm in there every day, just running or doing something like that, I'm not going to want to go to the gym. So with CrossFit, it's always something different. But that has drawbacks. It's hard to become proficient in any one thing if you're always jumping from thing to thing. It gives you a higher learning curve no matter what you're doing, even if it's something like some of our gymnastics movements that we do in CrossFit, pull-ups or things like that. Jump into a new one can still be difficult if you don't have some of the foundational movements and things that you have, the skills you need. All of that can leave you confused and overwhelmed. And I can see a lot of those reflections that I have in CrossFit as a person jumping into IT and security as well, because I think we all wear a lot of different hats. Some of us do get to specialize, but no matter if you're like at a help desk or just starting out, floor support, those kinds of things, all the way up to somebody that's been doing this for a long time, you're probably still gonna be bouncing around a lot. And sometimes that's what we do. It's like we're doing a task, we've got an engagement, we need to run a tool to do one thing. We learn that tool, we Google it. I don't know how much time I spend on Google, it's a lot. Or ChatGPT these days, right? They dig in, we learn that one thing, and then we may walk away from it and we don't touch that tool or that topic again for a couple of years. You go back there, again, you got your learning curve, it's hard to do, and you can get wrapped up in that really quick. So today we're going to talk about wireless, but we're going to try to kind of demystify that, give you some base foundational knowledge by starting at the base. We're going to talk about the electromagnetic spectrum. But before we can do any of that, we've got to go back all the way to electricity, talk about magnetism, then we'll roll into electromagnetic waves, the electromagnetic spectrum, the radio frequency spectrum. We'll look at some common RF protocols, and then tools and techniques for RF, where they're doing analysis or we're doing testing. And then we'll finally wrap it up with legalities. Electricity and magnetism, excuse me. Any electric current generates a magnetic field. Danish physicist Hans Oersted, 1820, noted that. He was doing some basic electrical experiments and had some compasses close by and noticed that they deviated due to the magnetic field. He didn't know it was a magnetic field. He was just like, hey, there's something here. So with magnetic fields, there can be different kinds of fields. So direct current, like you get from a battery, that generates a static magnetic field. I'm not talking static like static electricity like we have with lightning, or like in Denver this week, I've noticed it, walking around and I touch something in my hotel room and it pop. That's not what we're hitting here. But it's a continuous field. While alternating current, like we have in our homes, on the power lines, those kinds of things, that actually generates a changing magnetic field. So let's look at a direct current here. So going up, we have this wire. That's where our current is flowing. One thing to get a magnetic field, you have to have flowing current. So if a switch is turned off, There's no magnetic field being generated. A direct current generates a static magnetic field like we talked about. So in this case, it's just a circular field out from the carrying conductor, so it's wire. However, with a oscillating magnetic field or an alternating magnetic field, we get an electromagnetic wave. So we're going to throw that concept in here. So the red arrow there, it's labeled Y. That is our wire, or it could be a radiating conductor, such as an antenna that's been designed. That's carrying our alternating current. Z, the blue arrow there, it's a little bit hard to see. It represents the magnetic field that that wire and that alternating current in that wire generates. So we have an interesting phenomenon here. The magnetic field radiating out from there that we see as a sine wave is in blue. That generated by a principle called induction, an electrical field as well. So flowing through the air, radiating out from that conductor that's got the alternating current, we have two different fields, the magnetic field and the electric field. So that gives us together an electromagnetic wave. It's two different pieces there. They do operate transverse to each other, I believe is the term. This was first hypothesized, so there was this guy, James Maxwell, he's a Scottish physicist and mathematician in 1865. He said, hey, looking at electricity, magnetism, and he even threw light in there because he was like, I think light's related to all this. He said, these are just different manifestations of the same phenomenon, okay? He came up with the theory of electromagnetic radiation, which is the generation of this wave, and then he went on and predicted the existence of radio waves. He didn't prove them, he just predicted it. So let's pause there and we're going to jump in and look at the electromagnetic wave. There's a lot going on here, so we're going to walk through it. We're going to start out at the top. We'll look at the red line. So that's the representation of our wave. The peak point of the wave that we represent as a sine wave is the crest. That's what we call it, the crest. The base, the lowest point, is the trough. If we think of the ocean, you've got crest and a trough on all your waves that you see. The distance at the top between two crests of the wave, or I would say two subsequent crests, that is the wavelength. And then we look at amplitude. So the center of the wave, we have a center line. The amplitude is the height of the wave. So the length is crest to crest. Amplitude, the height, is center line to the top of the crest, okay? Now, waves are pretty cool. If we have a mechanical wave, those are going to be directly influenced by the speed of those waves are going to be influenced by whatever medium they're traveling through. So like sound, that's going to be influenced there. Or if it's any kind of wave there. Instead, like mechanical waves have to have a medium to travel through. Electromagnetic waves, however, can travel through a vacuum. They don't have to have something to travel through. So we use these, we see this in space because our sun, if you think about it, generates electromagnetic waves. We get UV, we get ultraviolet from the sun, but we also get just the light that we see, right? So that electromagnetic wave moves at what we call, you've all heard it, the speed of light, right? The waves can vary, though, in speed, depending on what medium they are passing through. So like some of our electromagnetic waves, very low frequency, can travel through water. They don't move quite as fast there, though. The waves, electromagnetic waves, do have a direction of propagation, the direction they're spreading. And one of the most important things we're going to talk about here, or I guess kind of the next two things, the wave cycle. So wave cycle is over time, the wave from one crest all the way down to the next crest. So that's one cycle, one iteration of that wave. Frequency we look at is a number of wave cycles that are passing a given point in time over that period of time. So we look at it here with electromagnetic waves. Well, one of those radios that I had on the front, it was made in the 1930s, the late 30s. And on it is labeled cycles per whatever. So back then they were still using the term cycles. Now we use the term hertz to describe how many cycles per second a wave has. And that's due to German physicist Heinrich Hertz, who in 1886 actually proved Maxwell's theories of the existence of radio waves. Another really cool thing about electromagnetic waves are that they can be reflected and they can also be refracted. So refracting is bending. Well, where would we see a wave being bent? If you think of a prism, you ever seen a triangular piece of glass? As a light wave goes through there, it bends and slows down, speeds up at different parts of that, and that splits it out into the different colors that we see. So that is an example. So let's move on and look at the electromagnetic spectrum. There's a lot here. And the electromagnetic spectrum is kind of special because technically it goes on forever, and it can go in reverse forever as far as we talk about wavelength and frequency. It's just what we can measure. On the left hand of that slide, we've got low frequency, 10 hertz, and it goes on further. And then on the right-hand side, all the way we get into cosmic rays. And some of that's hard to see there because of the white and the content, but we've got different bands is how we split up the spectrum. And even within those bands, we split it up into subbands. So that all comes into play later on when we start talking about radio more so. We look there in the middle, we see visible light. So that's kind of probably the first thing a lot of us think about when we talk about the electromagnetic spectrum. Below that, we have immediately infrared. And those infrared and ultraviolet on the other side of the visible light spectrum were discovered about the same time in the early 1800s, just within a couple of years of each other. Infrared actually means inferior to red, and so it's because it's right below red. Ultraviolet is right above violet, so that's where they get those names. Everything from ultraviolet up, we have what we think of as a wavelength. We talked about that earlier on the slide before. The wavelength, ultraviolet and up, is so small that that's where we start having damage done to humans and animals from those. So we think about ultraviolet rays, UV, causing skin cancer, or other types of rays. You get too many X-rays. You can have cancer form that way. Other radiation, but they also use some of that for good things. Some of our medicines and stuff. We are getting into nuclear medicine where we are using some of those. So let's jump in, look at some measurements within electromagnetic waves. We did talk about, we use hertz as the measurement of frequency. And on wavelength, we talk about it in meters normally. And they're both metric based. So wavelength, if you've got an electromagnetic wave with a wavelength of 1 kilometer, that's super long. It's a really long, low energy wave. The higher you get, so we've got meters, centimeters, millimeter. My metric's not that good. I can't remember what the next one is. Nanometers, very, very small. I mean, we're talking down to, subatomic size in the waves there. And one thing that's also interesting about mechanical waves, about electromagnetic waves, is that as the wavelength gets smaller, the energy in that wave gets higher. So one reason that long distance waves, like we'll look at radio waves that are very, very low frequency, they can travel through water because there's less energy in those waves, so they go through the medium better. There's less energy to get refracted or reflected. Whereas on the other hand, there's some higher frequency waves that, it's just not going to go through water. You think about, just even your Wi-Fi signals, not going to penetrate some of those things. On the hertz side, on the frequency side, we look at kilohertz, megahertz. We've all probably heard that just because our common wireless things that we use, 2.4 gigahertz, 5.8 gigahertz. And then on there, we get higher up into higher frequencies as well. All right, common uses for each of these bands in the spectrum, different slices. Radio waves, we're looking at radio communications like AM radio, FM radio, television, broadcast television, cell phones, GPS, radar. Microwaves, we get a little bit of overlap there with radio because we have like Wi-Fi in there. But microwaves, your microwave oven at home, it's using electromagnetic waves to heat your food. Satellite communications, radar. Infrared, we've got thermal imaging, night vision. And it's interesting, as you start digging into this stuff, some of the correlations you see with nature, like there's some insects that can see in the infrared, like bees, things like that. Remote controls, I don't know, I think this is a wireless one, but a lot of our remote controls are infrared. I remember as a kid, we didn't have remote controls. You had to get up and change the dials on the TV, right? So, remote controls, I guess that's a great invention for us. Fiber optics, if you've got those, in your data centers or whatnot, those are all running over infrared. We have visible light. Those are kind of some things there. Ultraviolet, we talk about being able to use ultraviolet for good to sterilize things. The tanning industry, they use that. That's what they use there is bulbs that produce ultraviolet light. Can be used in medical imaging. And then x-rays, we get in medical imaging like bone scans. There was a guy I knew that he said when he was growing up, I think it was in the late 50s, the department store there in town had this device that you could go up, you'd try on a pair of shoes and you could put your feet in it. And then your parent, so like your mom, could look through an eyepiece and see your bones inside the shoe to tell if they fit good or not. And he, that's what he was like, yeah, every day after school, we were going down there and we were sticking stuff in there and looking, that's an awesome application. I was like, oh, that's cool. But just think about how much leaking of x-rays that, and that was kind of his thought was like, I wonder how much x-ray exposure I got from that. And I can't remember what those were called. I looked them up and I was like, oh yeah, they're still out there. So I say they're still out there. There's information on them out there. They're probably not out functional in public anymore. Airport security, if you flew out here, you went through some sort of x-ray imaging machine. And then we get into gamma rays, like we were talking earlier. They can hurt us, but we can also use them for good to target specific cancer cells and kill those cells or radiation therapy. All right, so let's talk about the radio frequency spectrum. This is the portion of the electromagnetic spectrum from 3 hertz, so that would be 3 cycles a second, to 3 gigahertz. And when we start talking about radio spectrum, then we have to get some regulatory stuff going here. In the US, it's regulated by the Federal Communications Commission and the NTIA. They divide that up into bands. So they say, hey, like for amateur radio, there's specific places that amateur radio is allowed to transmit if you've got a license. There's places for like citizens band radio, family radio service, television, radio broadcast. There's bands where we say, like my watch, it's got radio stuff in it, it's got cellular, it's got all sorts of stuff. Those all operate in certain bands that are planned and I guess, trying to think of a good word. We'll just say they're planned by those two agencies so that there's not overlapping in frequencies. So like, they make sure that, hey, the FM station that may be in the city where I live isn't going to be too powerful or overlap into the frequency that an FM station is using, 60 or 70 miles away. So there's all sorts of coordination like that. Globally, all of those agencies cooperate with an agency called the ITU to do planning for frequencies worldwide, because a lot of these systems interconnect. It's like, hey, if we're using a certain frequency for a satellite communications in the United States, we don't want that to get trashed or something in another country. They don't want to have conflicts with their frequencies they're using, so they all work together. So the frequency spectrum. This chart is leaving off a little bit. It starts at 3 kilohertz, so that would be 3,000 hertz. Starting from 3 to 30 hertz, we have a band called extremely low frequency, ELF. Right above that, from 30 to 300 hertz, we have super low frequency. And above that, from 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz is ultra low frequency. They get creative with their names, don't they? Ultra low, extremely low. So those are the ones where we're talking if we're wanting to, underwater communications, things like that. I would always hear, read books growing up, and I always loved to read books about submarines for some reason, like World War II historical fiction. And they're talking about, hey, we got a radio message. And it's like, how did they get a radio message when the sub is, very, very far underwater? How does that work? And so, yeah, I learned that coming along here. So we get into VLF, very low frequency, LF, low frequency. That's, again, maritime radio, some navigation, navigational beacon kind of things. MF, AM radio, shortwave radio in the high frequency band. Then we run into in VHF, FM radio, television broadcast, the VHF television, FM radio. So we're looking at 30 megahertz all the way up to 300 megahertz. There's a station in the town where I live. It's 106.1, I think, is its center frequency. So it's 106 megahertz. So that would fall into the VHF band there. UHF, we have UHF television, broadcast television, mobile phones, GPS, Wi-Fi, 4G, those all fall into that UHF band. And that's kind of going back to the TV that I remember as a kid, our first TV we had, it had 2 different channel bands. So it had one for VHF. It was a knob that you turned. I can't remember what channels they were. It was like lower channels up to like 9 or 12 or something. I see some heads shaking. Y'all remember. But if I wanted to listen, or there was a station we had in our area, it was channel 32. If I wanted to do 32, well, that was up in UHF. And the dial was labeled UHF, but I had to turn the VHF dial to a certain spot and then turn the UHF dial. So a different shifting of frequencies that we see there. Satellite communications, SHF, super high frequency. Again, created with our names. And then the next group up, 30 gigahertz, all the way up to 300 gigahertz. We get into some extremely high frequency. And I had never seen anything like that until I started working at the company I work for now. And we've got some massive field networks just running out, doing oil and gas stuff out West Texas, New Mexico. And they were having a problem with one of their radios. And I was looking at it, helping them out, did some troubleshooting. And I got to looking at it. It was a 60 gigahertz radio. I was like, wow, I didn't know this existed. So Always fun stuff like that. And of course, that is something we'll talk about later, but that is a band that is licensed. I can't just go buy a 60 gigahertz radio and run it and not get in trouble eventually. So this chart is beautiful. This is an example. We talked about frequency allocations earlier in the SEC and the government agencies that allocate that. So this is the frequency allocations for the United States. As we get into our higher frequencies that are there on the bottom, and this isn't designed for you to read. You can download this off the internet if you want to find it. You like Google, US frequency allocation chart or something like that. You see how they're coordinating the frequencies between different services, between different users, and they can do this through some different means of modifying the electromagnetic waves. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. The big blue chunks there, that big blue chunk on the top second row is AM radio. So that's where we see that. Some of those other chunks, broadcast television, FM radio, those kinds of things. And that's kind of the electromagnetic space that we have, the radio frequency space. It is limited to a sense. And they're very interested in leasing that space because they do have leases, they get paid money. That's a revenue generator for those spaces. So we think about, I don't remember, I think it was about 2009, we had the televisions changed from analog signals to digital. And they spun it as, oh, it's going to be great, you get better signal and stuff. And yeah, you get clear signal. But really, it was because a digital signal takes up less bandwidth over the air than we do with an analog signal. So they could cram more stuff in or put other things in and license that frequency out as well. It was maybe it was a side benefit for all of us. So let's talk about how we send data. We talked about electromagnetic waves and some of the different spectrums, but you got to get data onto that wave. You can't just send a wave out. So we've got some different types of modulation, and there's many more than just this, right? I mean, we get into Wi-Fi, there's frequency shift keying and all sorts of things like that. Amplitude modulation, we talked about amplitude earlier with waves. So that's the height of the wave. So we're modifying the height of the wave with amplitude modification. You think AM radio, that's amplitude modification radio. That's what that's doing. Frequency modulation, again, that's where we see FM radio and a lot of our other signals. We're changing the frequency of the wave by modifying it with we take the carrier wave and then we modify it with another wave and change the frequency. We can also have modulation that can be analog or digital. So with with our computing devices, our Wi-Fi and all that, that's going to be digital modulation. And even if we think about the carrier wave, think of Morse code. It goes out. That is technically digital because it's an on and off keying of the carrier wave. Modulation examples. We'll start out here in the middle with frequency modulation. So in the middle of all of them, we have a carrier wave. Those are all the same. Frequency modulation, we have a modulating wave is our input. That's applied with the carrier wave. This gets into math, and we're not covering math, and I don't understand the math, but that's where it all comes from. And then at the bottom, we have a modulated result. So we can look at that, and you can see that the frequency of that carrier wave has actually been changed. On the left, we have amplitude modification. So again, it's a carrier wave the same. We apply a modulating wave, and we see on the bottom that the actual amplitude of the wave is changing. Whereas we have digital modulation, carrier wave, we have ones and zeros is our wave for the modulating wave. On and off, on and off. We hold it up for longer, we drop it to 0 for longer. However, we need to modify that. And then we get our modulated result. So there our frequency is changing, we see that. Amplitude staying the same. But that's a digital modulation. All right, so this is a fun little capture from a radio station. I did this, I think it was Saturday night where I live, using a Hack RF and a piece of software called SDR++. And I wanted to look at a FM broadcast so we could see the modulation of that. And that's what we're seeing here. The middle there is what we call the spectrogram. So it's a view of the electromagnetic spectrum. SDR++ is telling me that this is an FM broadcast where I'm at. And we see on the left, we're at 106.05 megahertz all the way to 106.5 megahertz on the right side of the screen. So that gray area that's highlighted there is the bandwidth. So we have a center frequency of 106.3, and to a identical slice on either side is where that signal is allocated to be able to exist. As that frequency gets modified, it's going to go in and out there over time. We see below it the transformed waveform. So when it's all yellow like that, that's like when they were playing the music. Then when it clicks to red, that's when the announcer was speaking. So those just some interesting things there. The two flat top bands to the side, we see those. This is a digital station. So they've got an FM analog, an analog FM signal, but they also have digital broadcast bands. And that's where we got at the top. It's throwing along there. It's saying, hey, retro mix is on the radar. So that's where we're getting some of that information. But those are some examples of analog signals there, staying very, very stable for us. Okay, let's move into some common RF protocols. These are organized in order of lowest frequency down to highest frequency. And these are examples. They're not all inclusive, but some ones you might run into out in the wild. So we have RFID. That is a low frequency. So I do have it with me. I've got a key fob for work. We've probably all seen these. You get into like health clubs or whatever, just a little bitty key fob. And actually, you've got one on your badge. I forgot. In the right-hand corner of your badge, you've all got one of those. So your vendors go, they scan it, that energizes the coil. So it's like a little radio, kind of like a crystal radio. You think about that, it energizes the coil. And that chip says, oh, I've got energy, I need to transmit. And it transmits a number, which then goes back to a database. It says, hey, Tait got scanned by this vendor, right? So that's an example, RFID. I think those are low frequency, right? Excellent, okay. There is a higher frequency RFID that operates at 13.56 megahertz, and as well as NFC, so your phones, those kinds of things. LoRa is a radio protocol that operates down at 915 megahertz. That's a good low power, long distance protocol. Then we roll into ZigBee in the 802.15.4, which is Z-Wave. So any of your smart home IoT sensors, I've always kind of resisted that stuff. And then I just moved apartments and I was like, it had a wireless thermometer there, or thermostat. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. So I was, I got that working, and I was like, a couple of weeks later, I was like, I was kind of trying to hack my sleep schedule. And I was looking at buying one of those alarm clocks that has the light bulbs that wake you up with the, it's supposed to be sunrise and stuff. And I was like, no, I'm going to Tim the Toolman tailor this, and I'm going to buy some Philips Hue color full spectrum bulbs, and we're going to get some good lumens in there. So, more power. So I bought some Philips Hue bulbs, and I'm like, oh, these are fun, So, all of this RF stuff that I've been kind of resisting in the home automation, it's starting to come into cycle now. RFID, again, this is, supply chain inventory tracking. Bluetooth BTLE, we're starting to get up into the 2.4 gigahertz. There's a lot of stuff that kind of lays in here. Wi-Fi, again, your Wi-Fi at 5 gigahertz. The new 6E standard that's out, we're looking up, of course, 6 gigahertz. 5G. So does anybody have a phone that does 5G? It's been It was slow coming out. I live in kind of in the sticks in West Texas, so it was a little slow getting out there, but it is there now. So we're talking high-speed mobile networks. Okay, so let's go through some tools, some tactics and techniques that we can use with some of this foundational RF stuff that we've got. So hardware and software for wireless. We have to have hardware for wireless because, I can't just like have my computer just grab stuff out of the air. I can't plug it into the network and do network pen testing like I do if I'm, have a physical wire. And that's one thing that makes wireless, I think, fun and exciting, and like we talked about, mysterious earlier, because it's just the stuff flying through the air. And it's, I bought a new software-defined ham radio back in September. Little bitty thing compared to my other ham radios that are like, massive boat anchors with vacuum tubes, that weigh like 30 or 40 pounds. Little bitty thing, and hooked up an antenna just, to kind of just say, hey, let's see how this works. And from my home there in Texas, I'm picking up people in the French Pyrenees just with this, wire antenna that I made out of an extension cord. Thousands and thousands of miles away. People in Australia, New Zealand. And, for me, that's having that hardware is really cool, but it's being able to pull it out of the air. So we're going to talk about hardware and some of that software that goes along with it. Wireless hardware. One thing you're going to notice, or maybe it is just me, I don't know. Because, when I do like home improvement projects, I always have to buy a new tool. So maybe we're like that with technology too, is like, we just like to buy tools to do our jobs, to have fun and play with. Bluetooth adapters. Here's some examples. Ubertooth 1 from Great Scott Gadgets. And then there's a UD100 Bluetooth adapter. I found several different brands. I don't have this. I don't have either one of these. The Sena UD100 Bluetooth adapter. Apparently it's got pretty good range as far as transmit and receive. Wi-Fi adapters. Alpha has kind of, as far as I remember back, has always been the standard. This is an Alpha card that I've had probably for, oh goodness, maybe close to 20 years. I don't know how long. It's old, but it works. One thing you look at, like this one does ABGN. As we get new wireless standards, some of your cards may not work with those. And as you're buying cards, looking for cards, you kind of got to watch for what make sure it's going to work with what you want to do. Panda Wireless, they make some like this. I bought this. This is a PAU09 that I got last year. Got several of those running around. I caught my son a few weeks ago stealing one. And I was like, dude, that's mine. I need it for work. So it's, you got to get your kids your own stuff. This one's a PAU0B, again, Panda. And it does great for capturing stuff, but I was can't remember what I was trying to do. I was setting up a Rogue AP, and I was using this for a back-end channel connection, so I could go connect to it and kind of see if I'd caught anything interesting. And I could not get this guy to operate as a wireless access point for me. May have been my software that I had going or what, but that was just kind of what I ran into there. We get into RFID. Where did that guy go? We got Flipper Zero. That's a fun one, and it can do some different stuff like Bluetooth as well. Yeah, so Flipper Zero. I bet we've got some Flipper Zero people in the crowd. You see some heads shaking, hands. Yes, awesome. Proxmark, I have not used a Proxmark. They've got a tool out there for RFID, reading, writing, and then you can also get a USB reader writer for RFID. And then finally, we talk about wireless hardware, software-defined radios. And this is really, I kind of think, where it gets exciting because I remember first when I saw software-defined radios come out, and it was a company, they're listed on their, I think, yeah, USRP. They had some high-end gear. I mean, it was like stuff that I couldn't even get close to affording. And some of them are still down there. Some of the stuff that's listed there in enterprise and military, and even the high-end software-defined radios are very expensive. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars. So it's not something I'm going to go buy. But entry level, just like receive only, you just want to listen and see what's out there. The RTL SDR, is great. And these came, they discovered these were TV tuners. Like you could I remember seeing them in stores. It's like, hey, you can plug, I don't remember what year that was. I mean, it was like, you can plug them in and watch TV on your computer. And I was like, I really don't want to watch TV on my computer. Why would I want to do that? You know, of course, now that's what we do. We watch YouTube or Netflix on our laptops, right? So they discovered that they could tune these not only to the TV channels, but to channels and frequencies outside of that. So that's where the chipsets in these are. This is actually an RTLSDR.com branded device. There's some other ones out there. With all of these, a lot of them get cloned by different places. So you got to be kind of careful with what you get. I'm not worried, I'm not necessarily worried about getting a virus or anything, but it may not work quite as well as some of the other ones. So mid-range, we talk about the Hack RF1. Again, that's from Great Scott Gadgets. They've got a lot of good information. I'll step back. RTLSDR.com. They've got a blog that they run. They've got lots of good radio information, just different stuff. I mean, you never know, maybe hey, here's how you can set up a radar with, these little guys and stuff like that. Hack RF1, Great Scott Gadgets, they also have lots of really good radio information out there for us. So that's, I've got one of those here. Lime SDR, I haven't used one of those. High end, we get into Blade RF, USRP, that's where we get really, really expensive. Wireless software, we talk about Wi-Fi security testing. So if this is I'm wanting to break Wi-Fi, I'm wanting to crack somebody's WPA2 password or something like that, their pre-shared key. You're looking at AirCrack, some tools like that. Kismet's been around for a long time. I love Kismet. I'm still not great with the web interface. I like the old school console interface, but it's great for just seeing what's out there in wireless access points. Bluetooth security, there's some different projects there. And like I said, this is kind of a representation of all these. Y'all may know better ones out there, and I'd love to hear about those. RFID, NFC testing, we've got Proxmark. Really, if I go to do RFID, if I'm trying to clone somebody's badge or something, or they leave their badge, I'm reading it with my Flipper Zero, and then I'll replay it with that. Dave Fletcher here, that's in the audience, he had a blog about, I just lost it, Why Gotcha, where he had taken a long-range HID reader. And when we say long range, we're talking what, 18 centimeters or 18 inches, foot and a half. Yeah, long range. But still, it's I could put it in my backpack and maybe get close to somebody in an elevator and read a badge. So there's projects out there like that kind of can, they're hardware and software there. ZigBee, we've got Killer Bee, ZigBee to MQTT. I haven't dug into that project. It's just one I ran across. And then we have some software-defined radio stuff. GQRX runs on software-defined radio. It can work with ZigBee. And then just general software-defined radio in RF. GNU Radio, SDR++, Universal Radio Hacker. Those are all ones that I've run across. Haven't used Universal Radio Hacker much, but it looks like a really neat kind of getting in and figuring out what protocols are doing, what the wireless signals are doing to reverse engineer those. Wireless software and distributions. Software, there's one I love, EPAMR. It's just, those evil twin attacks. We talked about the Hack RF Portapack. Well, we talked about the Hack RF from Great Scott Gadgets. So the Portapack adds a battery and some software, we'll call it frosting. It's like frosting on the cake. The Portapack's the Hack RF's the cake. We get some nice frosting because, with this, I can go capture things directly and not have to have a computer. And it's got a lot of built-in things already for us. So distros, sometimes getting this going on your own can be hard. So Kali Linux has a lot of wireless stuff built into it, different tools. And there's Dragon OS. I haven't used it personally. It's on my list to try. There's always something new to try. So that's something there that is supposed to be built for wireless, specifically a bootable OS, kind of like Kali. And it also has a lot of amateur radio stuff in there. Wireless techniques, look at your vendor documentation, whatever it is. There's going to be subcomponents there too. They have data sheets. You can also look at the FCC website. Like the board, the chip that is on your badge has an FCC ID on there. If you go to fccid.io and plug that in, it's going to tell you all sorts of cool stuff about that chip. Like, hey, it does Bluetooth. Hey, it does Wi-Fi. These are the frequencies. And you can even see pictures like that metal shield. You can see underneath that metal shield, there's photos out there of that. You can also find your target hardware. Go buy one. Play with it. Sometimes you can find old used stuff off eBay cheap. That's what, with me, maybe we've got an HMI controller out in the field, and I want to say, hey, I want to be able to take this apart and look at it. Maybe I go find an old one off eBay and take that one apart. Resources and projects, just general learning. We've got NASA. They've got a electromagnetic spectrum website out there that's great. It's probably targeted for like 6th graders, but I loved it. So I learned a lot there. This was the one I ran across, Tait Radio Academy. It is free, but I really liked how he had some of his stuff laid out there. It's not so much targeted just for, hey, learning it for security or anything, but it's just, hey, general wireless knowledge. And then the Amateur Radio Relay League, ARRL.org, they manage stuff, wireless licenses for amateur radio in the US. They've got a lot of really good information on their website. And then, of course, the internet, YouTube, things like that. Staying legal. You can listen anywhere. As long as you're listening, you're good. Now, if you set up outside the White House or something like that, listening, there might be some physical constraints there, but yeah, legally you can listen to any wireless broadcast. Transmitting, we are limited though. ISM is I'm losing my acronym. It's a band that has been licensed for industrial and scientific medical, thank you, I appreciate y'all, use that it's been licensed, but it's not licensed. So that's like my home Wi-Fi, my cell phone, all those kinds of things, the Bluetooth, that's all falling into those bands. FRS, GMRS, family radio service, you go to you'll get the little walkie-talkies, like from Walmart or whatever, that have pretty good range. That's family radio service. GMRS is a licensed service, but it's there for people maybe who are needing some more power or whatever. Commercial use, if you're using it like in a commercial business, you're going to generally need a license. And like I said, amateur radio, it's all licensed by the Amateur Radio Relay League on behalf of the FCC. So, wrapping it up, we've talked about electricity and magnetism, their relation with electromagnetic waves, the electromagnetic spectrum. Then we rolled into the radio frequency spectrum, RF protocols. We talked about some tools and techniques, hardware, software, and then some legalities. So this has been From Noise to Knowledge. Hopefully some of your RF signal stuff has been demystified. And I want to thank y'all for coming out to hear me. I want to thank Wild West Hacking Fest for having me up here. And with that, if you got questions, I'll take them.
Hi, first off, great talk.
Thank you.
When I was back in college, I did a project, senior project, where we caught all the POC-SAG and flex traffic from the local hospital and ran it through an IDS because it was funny. And when it comes to like doing stuff like that when you're not in academia, if you're just say capturing stuff, what are the legalities involved, like if any, of like if I see stuff going over the air that really shouldn't be, like social security numbers or like patient data stuff, kind of like if it's just going over the air and it's not even really encrypted, it's just like POC-SAG. Does like responsible disclosure usually come into play with that kind of stuff, or like what's the deal?
If I was faced with something like that, I would treat it kind of like I would with any sort of security vulnerability that I noticed, whether it's a flaw or whatever. So yeah, some sort of responsible disclosure. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure you're not going to get in trouble for what misconception there. But yeah, that's where I would take that.
So you were talking about that it's legal to listen, and as long as you got really big ears, it doesn't matter. What about decoding? If you come across some encrypted traffic, what about decoding, the legalities of that? Decoding, decrypting, however you want to talk about it.
That's a really good question. So speaking of, from an amateur radio kind of stance, there's specific rules that say those signals, those bands cannot be encrypted. Since they're public, everybody has to be able to hear them. So like if I was on FRS or the general radio service, that has to be where everybody can hear. Yeah, there's other areas we shoot Wi-Fi everywhere that is encrypted. If I can somehow figure out how to reverse engineer that and decrypt it, it's, what are you using it for? Kind of, yeah, I maybe, I've got a door reader at work that it uses my phone. When I get close to it, Bluetooth, it's got an app, Bluetooth pings and opens the door, right? Also got the RFID, but it's got Bluetooth. Well, I would really love to, from a penetration tester standpoint, physical side, learn to take that apart, deconstruct it, so that I can then use that. Maybe they're not using their, maybe they have weak keys or whatever. So it's kind of, what is it, research? Is it, decrypting your neighbor's signal to get on the free Wi-Fi? I don't know. Yeah, okay. There you go. Thank you.
Google good faith security research and follow that.
I like that.
Thank you. On the transmitting side, even in the 2.4, is it illegal? I assume it is, to disrupt your neighbor's wireless, disruption of other people's. Is there a fair use sort of
Yes,
play nice kind of legality?
So, I was talking about that with somebody earlier, or I can't remember if it was earlier this week or what, but yeah, basically it's play nice, There are legal limits for power and things like that you can do. But yeah, if you're intentionally causing a disruption and it can be proven, then yeah, you're gonna get in trouble. And that's the thing, is a lot of times they don't, the FCC's got a lot of stuff to do, and they may not care about you infringing on your neighbor. But I know there was an example in, I want to say it was somewhere in California, somewhere on the West Coast. It was a kind of a first responder radio net that gets together. They use it for for natural disaster kind of response. And there was somebody that was getting on there and blowing out their frequency they were on, broadcasting profanities and just all sorts of stuff. And, they kind of put up with it for a little bit, but then they got together, amateur radio. I'm constantly astounded by what some of those people in that space can do with things. They triangulated the guy's signal, found out where he was, validated that it was him there, and then they got the FCC involved. And the FCC came and paid him a visit, and I think he's legally getting in trouble now. So, thank y'all very much.